Hey guys, this is Frans, and I just wanted to give you an encouraging word, maybe a challenging thought for your heart as we walk through these times. I know all of our youth groups are dealing with different things, and I just appreciate you guys. I appreciate your youth pastor, and I wanted to just challenge you with something here and maybe a thought for what we're going on. It's crazy that all of our youth groups are now full of homeschoolers, and that's all they are is youth groups of homeschoolers. But this coronavirus thing has really rocked our world, literally. And everything's new and everything's different, but it's not anything that caught God by surprise. He's fully aware of everything. Matter of fact, there's stories in Scripture, several of them, that addressed these frightful moments of an entire nation. And I just want to kind of share one of those with you today and what they did and how we can respond. Exodus 14 is what I want to share with you. And to kind of give you the backstory, the people of Israel were in captivity. They were slaves in Egypt. And so the Pharaoh was there and Moses shows up, let my people go. And then these 10 plagues happen. And at the end of the 10th plague, man, he says, yes, get out of here, go. And so they begin their journey. And that's where we pick up the story. Exodus 14 verse 10 says, as Pharaoh approached, as they left, Pharaoh changed his mind and said, I'm going to go get them. I lost all of my slaves. Let's go get them. So it says, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring to you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will not see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. Now, you're like, how is that like today? Well, literally, they are stuck. They had left Egypt and they're headed towards the promised land, and there's this giant sea. The Red Sea is in front of them. Now, behind them is this army with thousands of chariots and hundreds of thousands of people, soldiers, all coming after them. They are literally stuck. We're just going to die here. We're afraid. And there's a lot of people that are afraid right now, and this coronavirus has taken people out. And so there's a legitimate fear that's there. And so how do we respond to this? What are we supposed to do in the midst of this? Well, first thing we have to do is ask the question, whose strength are you leaning into? And if I'm answering that question honestly, my default is to lean into my own strength and not God's. The first thing we need to do is to lean into God's strength and think about the perspective. There's a bigger story going on than what's in the news every day. There's a bigger story than coronavirus. God is writing a bigger story for you. And you don't need to miss that because you're so focused on this situation now. The Bible says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So lean into his power, not yours. Number two is this. Where is your focus? You know, what are you looking at? And the reason I ask that question is because many times God does not take away our fear. He just walks through it with us. And think about what happened in this story. Literally, after Moses raises his staff and his hand, and they part the Red Sea, and they're able to go through the thing that they were fearful of. And God will walk through your fear with you more often than he will eliminate the fear, because he wants us to count on him for every step, not just the end result. We want the end result, and we want it now. God says, let me walk you through this fear to the end result so we learn how to trust him with every step. Third, what should our response be? We have two options of this here that, and they're not options, two things that we're supposed to do that Moses did here. One, he talked about raise your staff, and he literally had a staff. And so he had this staff and he would raise the staff. Why? Moses and leaders would etch or write on their staff the things that God had done, the promises that he had made. And so he would literally take that staff and hold it so they could remember. You would raise your staff to remember what God had done. Raise your staff to do that. And then the second thing that he said to do, he said to stretch out your hand. Well, why do you stretch out your hand? Well, we raise our hand for different reasons. One, we know the right answer. We raise our hand. If the police come and they're there, it's an act of surrender. Raise your hands. When you win a game, when you score a touchdown, we raise our hands. It's a victory cry. When babies are first learning to walk, and I remember my kids, my wife would set them down, they start walking to me. The closer they got to daddy, the higher their hands would go up. because when we get close to our Father, our hands go. Those are all acts of worship. Our response in the midst of this should not be fear. God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and sound mind. And our sound mind tells us to do two things: to raise our staff in remembrance, to raise our hand in worship. Now, we don't have a staff that we can actually raise. So here's what we do have. We have a phone, and we raise our phone all the time. What I would challenge you to do is this: find something that reminds you of who God is and take a picture. For me, it's the Lord's Supper elements. It reminds me of what Jesus did. Take a picture of that, make it your screensaver, and every time you raise your phone, that picture pops up. You'll be reminded of who God is and what He's done. And then we need to worship. And worship's not just singing, it's how we live our lives for Christ. And when we do those things, then Exodus 14:14 says, you can be still, the Lord will fight for you. He's gonna fight for us through this. You can take confidence in that. So be challenged and be everything that God created you to be. This is a great time to tell His story that's bigger than this story. Man, I love you guys.